Previously, on Night of the Serpent. Strapping the enormous Eye of Zoltek to Vorn's back, our sleepless heroes depart the city of Orolunga and head east, through the wasteland, across the Eldani Basin, and making for the heart of Ubtao. Leaving the city, they are approached by 3 albino dwarves, led by Zizog, the fisherman they'd met yesterday morning. Approaching Gûlwyf, they present her with an item, a weapon, handcrafted by dwarven smiths. It is made from wood, essentially a club, with a short handle, a long blade, and then running along the blade, tiny shards of sharpened obsidian. This is a macahuitl, an Aztec weapon, and it is traced up and down with maze designs. Vachond, they call the weapon, the wood fist. And Gûlwyf can detect magical properties behind the weapon. They offer it in exchange for her hammer. Enamored with her new toy, she gladly surrenders the warhammer to the dwarves, who take it reverently back to their clan. Heading eastward, the party comes to the river Taff, but they approach it from a different direction than when they first crossed it, and they discover they are at a gorge, 50 feet wide, with a raging river below them. While Heck can fly across, his 2 companions, plus their shield guardian and their baby hadrosaur, have no means to cross, and so the party must move downriver to find an acceptable ford, which they do, though it takes them an extra day. Resting after their first day of travel, the heroes of Red Bazaar discover that their dreams have worsened. In Hex, he sees winged shapes that circle overhead, that watch but do not help him in his plight. In Gûlwyf's, the ziggurat is gone, and now there is no escape from the ravening hordes of undead that pursue her through the jungle. In 13's, most curiously, the heart of Ubtao begins to spin and interlock, much like the puzzle in their pack, and blue light begins to creep from the cracks, eventually revealing a sudden keyhole, for which 13 has no key. When they awaken, they are groggy and exhausted. Echo heals them with their magic, but they are disturbed by how much more powerful these dreams are becoming. Pushing eastward toward the distant escarpments, the heroes of Red Bazaar quickly become lost. Unbeknownst to them, after a day, they are turned around and heading back towards the river. As they reapproach the river Taff from yet another crossing, they hear shouting from the bank. 3 Chalton explorers have wrecked their canoe in the rapids of the river, and now one of them clings to a wet rock about to be pulled downstream. Heck flies into action and swoops down to retrieve the stranded explorer, only for her face to decay before him and her scream to shake him to his core. These are Majimake, river hags disguised as ordinary travelers, and one glance from their deathly glare is enough to drop you where you stand. Like drowned women, their hair is green and lank, their faces are bloated and grotesque, and their bodies are malleable as river water. It is a quick but desperate battle, during which both Gûlwyf and 13 drop like flies. In the end, thanks to Heck and Vorn, 2 of the Majimake are slain, while the 3rd slithers away into the river. Heck pursues, but can do little more than blast the river at random. Thoroughly shaken, the party corrects their navigational error and heads back east again. That night, as they camp, a brachiosaurus wanders into their encampment. Overawed at its size, they decide not to attack it, but Gûlwyf, in an attempt to reach out to the creature, is kicked clear across the clearing. The following day, the party presses on into the wasteland. A desolate heath of blowing sand, dead vegetation, and winding escarpments, they push eastward as best they can, despite the hostile terrain. On the first morning, they all awaken with a strange itch that none of them can explain. As they wander along a dried-up riverbed, they begin to hear strange sounds, terrified yowling like a cat in agony that echoes eerily all about them. They follow this sound, and it leads them, by nightfall, to a graveyard of leviathans, the bones of creatures. Sea creatures, much, much bigger than dinosaurs, lay scattered around or embedded in the canyon walls. There, encamped within the skull of an enormous something, is a pack of gnolls. Inside that skull, the party can hear the terrified yowling of not a cat, they determine, but a tabaxi. The party does not hesitate and mounts a hasty assault on the gnoll encampment. And that's where we stopped. That's where we ended the session. So how did it go? I think it went pretty well, you know. Nothing too exciting to report. It was a pretty standard sort of wayfinding session. A lot of the big changes this time around, since we're starting a new arc, kind of happened behind the screen, so I'll try to go through some of those right now. First off, I changed the way that Eku works with the party now. Instead of having access to all of her abilities all the time, the party has to choose which of 3 sort of modes Eku is in. Knowledge mode, where 13 has advantage on Arcana, History, and Religion checks. Healing mode, where 3 times per day 13 can cast either Cure Wounds or Greater Restoration. And defensive mode, where 13 has resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage. So this was done as an attempt to curb some of Eku's really, really powerful abilities, but also make the party think sort of tactically about how best to use Eku at any given moment. Story-wise, the idea is that Eku is dormant in 13, not taking an active part, sort of keeping to the back and not overstepping her bounds. In addition, I also revamped the way that their nightmares work. So now, after each long rest, the party makes a very low DC con save. On a failure, they awaken with 1 level of exhaustion. This can be nullified by Eku's Greater Restoration power. But every 5 days, the DC increases and increases. So eventually it's going to get to the point where they're going to be spending all of Eku's resources to try to keep this exhaustion under control. What's more, the exhaustion will get worse and worse and nastier as the party goes on. So the idea was to kind of slowly start to ratchet up the heat. They had a couple of levels of exploring the jungle with sort of the Dream Plague as a background threat, and now that Dream Plague is slowly starting to infect their mechanics. I have to be kind of careful because it seems like maybe they should have been suffering exhaustion earlier, but the last thing you want that to do is to feel onerous or boring, like it's not interesting to them anymore. I want to continue to have this pervasive sense that things can only get worse from here. As far as the session itself, yeah, there were a lot of highlights. I was really happy with the way the albino dwarf encounter worked out. It was a really nice way to have that mean something and have Gûlwyf's past be important, but not to distract the party on this wild subquest. So it ended up being about a session's worth of material all in all, and now Gûlwyf has this new item. The weapon, Vashand, is just a reflavored Mace of Disruption. I particularly wanted to give Gûlwyf an item that would be good at hunting undead. That's sort of Gûlwyf's favorite enemy, as it were. The Majamake encounter was the highlight, I think, of the session. Ah, man, it really got them. I think Jay, who was a dungeon master himself, was actually kind of pissed that he fell for it hook, line, and sinker, and he got very, concerned about chasing them down and killing them and punishing them for tricking him. Which, to me, as a dungeon master, that's just chocolate, right? It's one of those tricky encounters where you don't want to punish them for leaping in to help, but no one stopped them in any insight checks. They just immediately thought, okay, we have to help these people. Which is good, but they're in Chult, right? Nothing is as it seems. Mechanically, the Majamake were just reflavored sea hags. There is even a random encounter in the book that describes 3 sea hags posing as stranded explorers that asked the party for help. So it was pretty much just lifted straight out, but I thought sea hag was a little bit too bleh. I wanted to make something that felt a little bit more like it was part of Chultan mythology. I also really liked the way they reacted to the brachiosaur. It's one of those encounters that really seems cool when you see it, but it would just have come down to a very boring slugfest of the brachiosaur dealing a lot of damage on individual hits, but if it never misses, then it spends the entire rest of the round just getting pummeled on. It would probably go down in a round or two, especially with Heck unloading everything on it. But because I described its incredible size, the party felt for some reason that they couldn't take it. They definitely could have. But it just had this gravitas and this awe that made them want to sort of sit back in Jurassic Park the encounter, which I thought was perfect. Now it sort of lives in mystique for the rest of the campaign, the monster that nearly knocked Gûlwyf out in one hit. What was that strange itching about? You'll have to wait and see. And yes, the Knoll encounter is 1000% a Lion King reference. I laugh in the face of danger. And that was it. That was the session. Next week, they're going to assault this Knoll camp. It was originally kind of a throwaway encounter, but now that we stopped there to make it a cliffhanger, I think I'm going to really build it out and make it a big set piece. I'm going to draw a map. I'm going to go crazy. It's going to be fun. Very 4th edition is what I'm thinking. Lots of different enemies, lots of different terrain effects, that sort of a thing. That's it. How do you think I ran this session? How would you have run this session? Do you have any questions about Tomb of Annihilation, the way that I'm running the campaign? When was the last time that you thoroughly ambushed your players? You really got them off guard. Even better if they walked into the ambush themselves. Tell me about it in the comments. I'd love to hear about it. We'll be back next week with another episode of Previously On, but until then, happy adventuring.